Your best ideas aren't hiding in some far off future. They're sitting in yesterday, waiting for you to notice them. Welcome back to This Too Is Love. I'm Genevieve Kim, a creative coach who helps leaders and creatives find their voice and hit publish consistently, whether that's in writing, speaking, podcasting, or performing. In this week's episode, we're talking about a deceptively simple practice that saved my creative life more than once. A habit so small you could do it in the Notes app while waiting for your coffee, and yet powerful enough to turn nothing into a story worth telling. Most people think they're short on ideas. The truth is, they're short on a way to catch them before they vanish. Ideas don't disappear because you're not creative. They disappear because you're not paying attention. What I'm sharing today is a daily practice so simple, it's almost impossible to skip. Hit record, say in the last 24 hours, and talk for 5 minutes. No editing, no polishing, no pressure, just noticing. And this is exactly what master artists do. Not because they need another exercise, but because they understand that they are the forever student. They keep beginner's mind close, willing to take notes, pay attention, reflect, to find something new in the everyday. When you start tracking the smallest details of your life, you realize that's where the real gold has always been hiding. Earlier this week, I caught one of those small moments in my daily 5-minute voice note, and I pulled it out, gave it a little more attention, and it turned into the piece I'm about to read to you now. This is the result of me taking notes daily, so let's begin. It's called When the Bark Isn't About the Dog: What a Clash at the Dog Park Taught Me About Language, Pride, and Place. It happened in under 3 minutes, though the moment keeps blooming in my head as if memory had learned to unspool in slow motion. I am in the park, the heat pressing into my skin, book warm in my lap. Beside me, Taco, my border collie, whose body is usually a current of motion, has folded himself into the grass, chest rising slow, paws crossed like a gentleman at rest. To exhaust a border collie is to bargain with their native restlessness, to wrestle their mind into stillness. It is work, and I had done it. The park was nearly empty. Lisbon in August turns into a ghost town, its residents scattered to beaches and countryside, leaving behind sun-bleached benches and quiet streets. A few shapes moved at the edges. A woman with shopping bags, a man trailing his dog like an afterthought. And somewhere behind me, a child laughed in short bursts. I leaned back, proud in that private way we feel when our animals mirror the stillness we've been trying to teach ourselves. And then 2 small dogs appeared, cutting across the lawn in a reckless diagonal, their yapping sharp enough to slice the air between us. They came at Taco without pause, as though he were ground to be claimed. Border collies don't have a cute bark. Stress for him is low and quick, like the sound of a door slamming against a storm. If he'd been a terrier, it might have been dismissed as play, but optics matter, and these 2 yappers, had they been the size of Great Danes, there'd have Taco barked back, which seems appropriate, seeing that most creatures will respond when they sense a threat. But the yapper's caretaker didn't seem to think so. "You need to put your dog on a leash, it's the law here," which was strange, given that her dogs weren't on a leash either. I pointed this out because I thought the symmetry mattered. Her dog off leash, my dog off leash, and both of us rolling the dice on dogs potentially behaving like dogs. But when I pointed this out, the conversation shifted. Suddenly, it wasn't about dogs. It was about my Portuguese, or rather my inability to speak Portuguese. I understood every word she said. I just couldn't yet speak them with the same quick rhythm. And in her tone, I recognized something I'd heard all my life. The voice that says you are not from here and makes sure the words land where belonging lives. This is where it stopped being about dogs. My parents, immigrants from South Korea, struggled with not being able to fully express themselves in English and endured the assumption that the level of one's pronunciation was the level of one's mind. and I have held that same knife. The worst thing I've ever said, my personal low point, happened in a bookstore when I was 12. My mother wouldn't buy me the book I wanted. I sulked, and then I reached for the only weapon I knew would land. What do you even know about books? You can't even speak English properly. It was the way my father spoke to her, belittling, aimed below the belt. I had believed I was above it, and then I wasn't. My father told me not to live abroad. Don't do what I did. But advice is often just a warning disguised as care. He regrets leaving South Korea. It's become a shadow inside him. When he arrived in America, he went from white collar to blue collar overnight. This was before the world learned to say K-pop, before they learned that it was not Shanghai. Uprooting to America was a beginning that felt like an ending. A few small wins back to the motherland as someone worth looking at. Pride, attention, survival, braided so tightly together, it's impossible to separate them now. Hurt people hurt people. So when he told me not to stay in Portugal, I could hear all of it. The years of swallowing air that didn't want him. The strain of feeding 4 children in a place that never called him theirs. And for the first time, I could really feel the weight of my parents' experience. Sure, growing up in the US, I didn't exactly blend in as the all-American girl next door, but my accent was 100% made in the USA, California English. And that alone buys you a kind of credibility. No one could tell me I didn't sound like I belong. In Portugal, I don't have that shield. My Portuguese isn't as strong as my Spanish, which I learned living in Mexico for a year. And it's not that I don't have a thing for languages. I mean, I grew up singing in different languages, Latin, German, French, Italian, and Korean. Yet, somehow after 3 years here, I'm still at basic. This wasn't about vocabulary, it was about being seen or not being seen at all, through the thin, unyielding lens of language. If my mind were a closet, it would be immaculate. Labeled boxes, smaller boxes inside, pockets for the smaller boxes. I love the work of tidying, deciding what stays, what goes, what fits where, because it feels like control. And the mind loves to do this. It sorts, labels, creates micro rules for when each applies, but the soul runs on a different operating system. Past the story of me, past the story of her, when you get to an Akashic record level of, you see something else. The soul reads in a different language. That afternoon, my mind wanted to file the encounter under being treated as an outsider. Unfair dog park confrontations. Great for clickbait, neat categories, but not the truth. From that higher vantage, the moment wasn't about language or dogs. It was about 2 people hauling their overstuffed closets of stories, clutching their files like rafts, and here's what I almost missed. How quickly we confuse the file for the event, the label for the living thing. How one small moment pulls in the entire archive. So suddenly we are not talking about this day, but about every day that looked like it. From the soul's perspective, it's almost comical. We guard our labels, native, outsider, right, wrong, as though they're heirlooms, forgetting we can put them down whenever we want. The quickest way out isn't to win the argument. It's to close the file altogether, not with sentimentality, but with the kind of forgiveness that loosens the jaw and lets the leash slip quietly from your hand. I could have kept her as my bad guy and stayed as hers, but I didn't. Taco and I left the park, sitting differently on my skin. He trotted beside me, still off lead, ears flicking toward the sounds only he could hear. Behind me, her voice softened, until it was less a confrontation than a faint echo, a reminder that most drama is just the mind labeling the wrong thing, and the bark, it's almost never about the dog. So this is the result of me taking notes daily. It's a practice of recording something because that's where you'll find all the gold for your material. But this requires vigilance. So here's an exercise. Record yourself speaking for 5 minutes. Start with a prompt in the last 24 hours. It could even be in the last 24 hours. I'm not even sure if I can remember anything from it because... And as you're doing this, let go of any expectations for this to be poetic. This is not the time or place for that. The exercise here is to see if you can hit record and show up for 5 minutes. And here's why this matters. James Clear talks in Atomic Habits about reducing friction. The less resistance between you and the action, the more likely you are to do it. This prompt removes the hardest part, deciding where to start. From a writing perspective, this exercise works because it sidesteps the what should I write about bottleneck. The starting point is fixed, the time contained, the expectations are zero. This is also the work the master artists do. Not because it's flashy or advanced, but because mastery lives in vigilance. The master understands they are always a student, holding on to the beginner's mind, willing to reflect, take notes, and notice what's easily missed. The small daily act of attention is what sharpens their craft over time. Once you've captured your raw 5-minute recording, choose one small specific thing from it. Set a timer for another 5 minutes and start writing about that. Include a few details: where it happened, who was there, why it mattered, what it looked and sounded like. This is where the scene emerges. Like, who was there, where it happened, why it mattered, what it looked like and sounded like. Details transform a passing moment into something memorable. A simple moment becomes a whole story. If you do this long enough, and you stop moving through life on autopilot, you start seeing story material everywhere. Not because the world suddenly got more interesting, but because you trained yourself to notice. If you take nothing else from today, take this. The master isn't the one who waits for inspiration. They're the one who shows up for it every day. 5 minutes to record, 5 minutes to write. Do it not because it's glamorous, but because it keeps you awake to your own life. Because the beginner's mind is in a phase you grow out of. It's the discipline that keeps you growing. So sometime in the next 24 hours, hit record and say, in the last 24 hours, talk, then write about one small thing you said. That's your story seed. Plant enough of them, and you'll have more material than you know what to do with. Thanks for listening to This Too Is Love. If this episode sparked something for you, leave a comment, give a thumbs up, and subscribe for more weekly videos from me on the process of finding your creative voice. If you know someone who could use this, share it with them. If you'd like support in finding your voice in a creative endeavor, I'm a creative coach who helps leaders and creatives find their voice and hit publish consistently, whether that's in writing, speaking, podcasting, or performing. You can find all the ways to connect in the description below. Thanks for tuning in.